Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tsuyoshi. Just call me Tsuyoshi. I'm a research fellow and also the doctoral candidate, both in Japan and the US. This is my home university, in the Tsuyoshi University. It's the graduate program in social science. And I'm also the senior research fellow at Eubios Ethics Institute and also AUSN, or American University of Sovereign Nations, that Dr. Darumesa is currently serves as the president, as the provost. Just briefly to introduce about my background, I studied human science and social work for my bachelor's degree. And for my master, first I studied sociology, social science. I think the same as the professor, she already left. And also after graduating and finishing my master program in Japan, I moved to Europe to join another master in bioethics and law. And after that, I moved to the US to do a master degree program in public health together with Dr. Darumesa. And after that, I came back to Japan and currently doing some research project in bioethics, and also I teach the introductory courses in social science, methodology, and bioethics at some school. So today I want to talk about the ethics in science and research. So here's the brief outline of my talk. So what is ethics? And bioethics, the current situation regarding the bioethics or medical ethics in my country. And then I'm going to explain the concept of dignity, which I think is important in the research and science. And also I introduce some examples of bioethics, particularly in Minamata, which is located the southern part of Japan. And also some issues concerning organ donation and transplant, and also reproductive technology. Actually, the last part, these two topics are covered in when I was at the ABC, and also the conference yesterday at the Gangnam. So some of these topics might be overlapping, but in case for those of you who are not at ABC in Seoul or Gangnam, I want to cover all of these in my talk. So what is ethics? Even though I've studied and majored the bioethics, I'm still always asking myself, what is ethics? And why it's important? Nowadays, we have a lot of fields, such as medical ethics, environmental ethics, business ethics, media ethics, professional ethics, or ethics for lawyers. A lot of field in the ethics, but how can we define it? I think ethics can be defined and interpreted in many ways, depending on your background or your field, your culture. And to me, the ethics is ethics is something to think about how we can coexist together with nature, among human beings. So ethics is a sort of finding a new way of life, living together in society, in human beings and nature. So to me, these fields that I just mentioned, media ethics, environmental ethics, or business ethics, ethics in these fields, sometimes I feel it's understood in very narrow way, narrow sense. But to me, ethics is very broad, should be understood in a very broader sense. So to me, ethics is to think about how we can coexist together in this society. That's how I interpreted ethics. So moving on to bioethics, I just want to briefly introduce the current state of bioethics in my country. And bioethics is translated into my language, Japanese, as Seimei Rinri. You can see here 4 Chinese characters. And these first two characters means life or bio. And these latter 2 Chinese characters means ethics. So it's pronounced Seimei Rinri. When we say Seimei Rinri, it literally means life ethics or ethics in life and death. And also, so we have, when we talk about bioethics, some different notion lies in my country. It's not only about the ethics in medicine or biotechnology or science, but also when we say bioethics in Japanese, it should also include the ethics related to life and death. And it started around 1980s. At that time, the scholars and professors went to the US to study the bioethics, and later it imported to Japan as the US-born bioethics or medical ethics. So in the beginning, the bioethics in my country was heavily influenced by the US-born approach, which is the principle-based approach on ethical issues, namely these 4 concepts: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. These 4 principles. But when these concepts or ideas were first brought to Japan, we had a difficulty because in our language we didn't have the exact phrase for each term. But nowadays it's quite common that these concepts are translated into the Japanese using this way, using the Chinese characters. So autonomy, for example, is translated into Japanese as jiritsu. It's pronounced jiritsu. It means self-rule. Respect the autonomy, respect the self-decision making. That's what it means by autonomy. Also, beneficence, doing good. We have actually 2 words in my language for the term beneficence, jinkei, which is actually a Chinese origin. This term was used in the Confucianism, but we borrowed the idea from Confucianism and now used as the translation of this word, beneficence. And also we have zenko, which literally means doing good to other people. And the 3rd idea, non-maleficence, or mukigai in Japanese, do not harm, no harm to others. That's the idea. There's also justice. So now bioethics involves many people in a wide range of topics, including the human life, health, welfare, and death in this age of biomedical development. But when it comes to the decision making, we often wonder to what extent these principles should be valued or respected. For example, about the concept of autonomy, of course it's quite important to respect one's decision making in the healthcare or in the science, but to what extent should this concept be respected, especially in a culture where people value the family, for example. I think this is same as in Korea. In most of the East Asian countries, family value is also important, and some scholars and professors even argue that family autonomy of family is more important than the individual autonomy. So how should we make a balance between the autonomy of one's decision and the autonomy of family as a whole? So moving on to the dignity in science and research. So I think these, of course, four principles are quite important to think about in ethical decision making. But in conducting research and science and medicine, I think one of the key fundamental idea, I think, would be this concept, which is dignity, or respecting the dignity of the patient, respecting the human dignity. And when we say human dignity, it's often understood as the inherent dignity, which all human beings have as a virtue of human beings. So it's very objective dignity. In this sense, dignity has an objective dimension, and it's often used in science and policy. But I think what's also is important is dignity has the subjective dimension, which is how we human beings see one's dignity. It's about our perception of the dignity. So in my understanding, this dignity is not only about the objective dignity or inherent dignity, but also subjective dignity. So two aspects, two dimensions of this concept. And when we look at the Western philosophy in the history, some professor or Western academics talked about human dignity only in terms of our rationality, only based upon how we make decisions. Dignity is sometimes, in many Western countries, dignity is understood based on our rationality to make a decision and to make a plan for the future and to implement it. It's, I think, one aspect of dignity, but it's not. If it's all about human dignity, I think it's a very narrow understanding. To me, dignity is much broader. So dignity is not merely about the rationality, decision making or autonomy, but it's, to me, more about relationship or interdependency. We are connected to each other, and this relationship still exists. I think this might be one of the reasons why for example, in my country, the family value is quite highly regarded, because we always see ourselves in relationship with others or in relationship with family members. So we don't see ourselves merely as fixed, autonomous entity or as fixed substance. We try to see our identity or who we are as the broader circle of this unit. So we have this sense of connectedness or sense of togetherness. So this value or idea still exists in my culture. So human dignity, this concept, can have two dimensions, subjectively and objectively. That's how I understand about this concept. So this is a very interesting novel written by Kazuo Ishiguro. Do you know Kazuo Ishiguro?
Nobel Prize
Yes,
winner this year.
who got a Nobel Prize this year in literature. And his background is also interesting. He was born in Nagasaki in Japan, the southern part of Japan. But when he was a child, when he was 5 or 6, he moved to England, and now he doesn't speak Japanese, and he speaks English. So he gave up the Japanese nationality, and he is a novelist. And I'm a fan of his novels. His novels are quite interesting. But in one of his novels called The Remains of the Day, he depicted the character who tried to maintain what we call dignity. What is dignity? And in his novel, actually this was later done to the film, the movie. And if you haven't seen that, I highly recommend you to watch the film called The Remains of the Day. And in this novel, dignity was the sort of central idea. What is dignity? How should we preserve and maintain dignity? And the Kazuo Ishiguro depicted the location in this novel was in old England, and then there's a butler, and the butler tried to how can I say, he struggled to achieve dignity in his professional life as a butler. And so there's a very strong idea about dignity, which in this novel is the essential ingredient of greatness. And the butler said the dignity has something to do with the ability not to abandon the professional being. So this was the concept that the butler had in that novel. No matter what's happened to our life, we always have to keep in mind that we shouldn't abandon the professional being, or we may say the ethics as a professional. And later in his interview, he said, I'm not interested in what's happened in this reality, but he said, I'm more interested in how he or she sees what's happened. So sort of our interpretation is the curiosity for him, the Kazuo Ishiguro. When we talked about dignity, same thing might be said, because dignity is often understood as the objective value, the inherent value we all have as a virtue of human being. But how we see the dignity, how we see it, our perception of dignity is also important, I think. So to me, this quote by Kazuo Ishiguro is very interesting to think about. We are always interested in what's happened and how should we change this society? How should we change this reality? But to me, I'm more interested in how the people see what's happened. So just to quote, to think about the dignity and ethics. And when we look at the contemporary society in my country, obviously one of the characteristics is the rapidly aging society. According to some data, 40% of people will be over 65 by the end of 2060. So we are rapidly aging, and same trend can be said for South Korea. So we live in the fastest aging. We are the country which experiences this fastest aging in the world. And nowadays, most people die at hospital and clinics. And actually, the 80% of Japanese people die nowadays at the clinics or hospital. So we have a growing need for the long-term and palliative care that arises from this escalation in the number of elderly deaths. So how should we consider the current situation? Now, I just want to move on to the one example, which to this day often discussed. Then this happened in Minamata, which is the southern part of Japan, during the years 1932 to 1968. This is called Minamata Disease. Have you ever heard Minamata Disease?
Yes.
Yes.
The activist, the activist for Minamata Disease is awarded for, some kind of environmental environmentalist prize, sponsored by Chosun Daily News, the largest daily news this year. That's what I read.
Oh, I see. Yes, there are some many activists for the Minamata. Nowadays, a number of people ask for the Japanese government to have compensation on what the government had in the past, but still we have not resolved yet. It's a Minamata disease is a sort of neurological syndrome by the mercury poisoning from the waste in the industrial factory called Chisso. It's a chemical factory. And symptom, if a person is affected with this disease, he or she may suffer symptoms including ataxia, muscle weakening, and narrowing vision, and damage to hearing, speech, and hand and feet. So those people who are affected with this disease, Minamata disease, they cannot stop moving. They're always moving. Can you imagine that for the entire your life, you cannot stop moving? It's awful. It's terrible to see. But
So it's similar to Parkinson's disease.
it's sort of Parkinson's disease. But next, I think I put the film, just a small video to understand, to get the idea what it's about. So it's discovered in Minamata City the southern part of Japan called Kumamoto in 1956. Then I think I better to show you a video. Oh, before that. So this is how Minamata, this is show the process how Minamata is affected to humans. So first the waste and the contaminated stuff were exposed from the Chisson industry company and to the ocean, to the sea, and then fish have it and eat it. Then later we eat this fish. So what's going to happen? I think I'll show you the video on this.
In 1908, Shin Nippon Chiso built a factory in Minamata, a small fishing village in Kumamoto, Kyushu. The company manufactured nitrogenous fertilizers and soon became the major industry in Minamata. By the mid-1950s, Shin Nippon Chiso had become the industry leader in its field. In 1954, the Sanitation Office of Minamata City began receiving reports of an unknown epilepsy-like affliction which has since become known as Minamata Disease. Since the cause of the disease had not been identified, patients were isolated to prevent spread of the disease. Minamata disease is a neurological condition. Mercury poisons the central nervous system, damages the sense of balance and motor skills, which leads to increasingly intense body convulsions and ultimately death. In 1957, the Minamata Disease Research Group of Kumamoto University announced that Minamata disease is a toxic disorder of the central nervous system caused by certain organic mercury compounds transmitted through the intake of seafood. They isolated organic mercury as the sole cause through a series of experiments on cats. In the same year, extremely toxic levels of organic mercury were detected in the human patients. The report submitted to the Ministry of Health and Welfare stated that the underlying cause was organic mercury in seafood, and the wastewater discharge from the factory was suspected. Afflicted patients continued to be found until 1960. A rash of babies were born with brain damage and extreme physical disabilities. The governor of Kumamoto requested a voluntary ban on catches of seafood from the bay.
Yes, so this shows the how Minamata is brought to our body, humans, and how terrible it is. And it's very shocking to see this film. But I think it's quite. So now the patient with this Minamata disease are like above the 70s, 80s, 90s. Still some people still alive in the hospital and clinic. But they need help, and every day they the caregivers or health professional try to provide food or assistance to the patient. But it's very it's enormous suffering, and I can't imagine this happened not so long time ago in my country. But I think it's quite important to know what's happened from the industrial development and science. So now I want to move on to the second topic, which I actually presented at ABC, Asian Bioethics Conference. But for those of you who were not there, I just show you and to think about the interesting case regarding the organ transplantations. And probably some of you already know the trend regarding the deceased donor and living donors. We have two types. One is the living donation, the other is deceased donation. The deceased donor or brain dead donors. And interestingly, when we look at the deceased donation or deceased donors, my country, Japan, is ranked quite low. Do you know where the Japan is here in this ranking?
Second,
Yes,
the last.
here. Thank you.
Yeah.
The Japan is like second from the bottom. And where is South Korea? I think
In the middle.
yes, here, South Korea. So slightly lower.
The average.
Lower
Yeah.
the yes, on the average. When you look at the countries, the top is Spain, and followed by Croatia, Malta, Belgium, Portugal, US, France, Austria. So in these countries, they have a lot of deceased donors for the transplantation. But when we look at living donors, interestingly, Japan is ranking quite high in this ranking. Japan is here, above the average. And surprisingly, South Korea is second after Turkey. So on one hand, in many of the Asian countries, particularly East Asia, the number of deceased donor is quite low, as I showed you in the previous slide, quite low. But on the other hand, the number of living donors is quite high compared to other developed countries in the West. So why there's a huge gap between the two types of donors? I always wondering why this, the noticeable gap happened and exist in the many Western countries and Eastern countries. Yes, do you have any ideas?
Oh yeah, I have an idea. Although it's not based on systematic research, for deceased donors, it's for others. You see? I mean, it's for the people, not non-family members, okay? For living donors, usually, in my opinion, it's the donation of one of two organs, for example, the kidneys, one kidney, or a part of liver. to mostly for their family members or the what is it the 척수가 뭐지 여기? spine fluid. spine 척수가 아니라 그 뭐죠? 그 골수. bone marrow. Yeah, bone marrows. I think Koreans are rather generous with the donation of bone marrows. And even the bone marrows donation, I mean, it has the best bet for family members. That's my opinion.
Yes.
Or, I mean, the bone marrow donations by young men serving for their mandatory military service. That is my explanation,
Yes.
my guess.
Thank you. I totally agree with you. And that's what I explained at the ABC conference. And my theory, my idea behind this trend is that because in many Eastern countries, as I talked in the beginning, we highly value family. And in the case of living donation, it happens within family members. But in the case of deceased donation, the donor is somebody else. It's not related to family. So in my opinion, because living donation happened within the family members, for the most people in East Asia, by giving one of your organs, for example, kidney, is a sort of a way of staying connected with your family member. So this is why the number of living donors is quite high relatively in many East Asian countries. But since the deceased donor is not related to your family member, the number is very low, extremely low, especially in my country and South Korea as well. So that's the theory and probably cultural reason behind what's happening right now regarding the transplantation technology. And also this is what I talked about yesterday at the Kanun conference. This is about the eugenics and reproductive technology. Then when we look at our history in my country, we, under the name of Eugenics Protection Law, it was enacted in 1948 and lasted until 1996. It was made to prevent the birth of people with certain disorder or diseases. And under this law, a number of women with certain diseases or disorders, and you know the Hansen's disease or leprosy, was sort of forced into sterilization. And now, from today's standpoint, we say, autonomy is important. So this act was definitely against the patient autonomy, against the dignity. But at that time, the horrible incident happened. So nowadays in my country, a number of women demand for the government to have compensation for what's happened under this law. But so far, the government has not recognized the women who were forced to sterilization, and no compensation has been made. So I hope in the near future that government will recognize what's happened under the Eugenics Protection Law and have compensation on women. Yes.
Could you give us the Chinese characters for that law.
It's a
우생학.
우세가
아니 우세 호고.
호고, sorry, 우세 호고호,
Okay.
호로,
Okay.
우세 유세 호고호,
Okay.
유세 호고호. Using 5 Chinese characters. Yes.
Yeah, in Korean 우생보호법.
우생호고, I see. Yeah,
Yeah.
우생호고. Yes, the same. And also, when we look at modern technology, such as ART or assisted reproductive technology, we have 3 types. Basically, the donor insemination, DI, which was performed in 1948 at the Keio University Hospital in Tokyo. And the later, this technique, medical technique, was confirmed by the JSOG, or Japan Society of Obstetrics and Gynecology. So now, of course, under some condition, but now the use of embryos and eggs and sperms were confirmed by this association. So, and of course, we have some rule and condition that people can use the donor sperm or eggs. And also, we have another type of ART, which is in vitro fertilization, well known as IVF. And in Japan, the first IVF baby was born in 1983. And surprisingly, today, hundreds of people were born through this technique. And so far, it is said that more than 18,000 children have been conceived through IVF. And also, we have another type of ART, which is surrogacy. This one is totally banned by the JSOG, Japan Society of Obstetrics and Gynecology. But as you may often hear in the news or media, some infertile couple try to go to other countries to have the treatment, like Thailand or India. So some cases are reported. So how should we consider these modern technologies? This is just to wrap up my talk. In conclusion, the dignity, I believe, is a central concept in ethics, science, and research. We should always keep in mind that dignity should be respected when you do whatever research or scientific conduct. And we have experienced a lot of sufferings in our history over the past decade, which we should also to keep in our mind. So the lessons from the past horrible experiences needs to be shared for our future, so that we can also nurture the ethical way of thinking together with people when we live today. So this is all about my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, can I have any questions? And welcome to our new colleague.
Hi.
Please introduce yourself with your question. Hi,
Do I
I'm
stand
Daryl. Yeah, if you like. Yes, you can sit down, it's fine.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Esther. I'm an intern from the University of Waterloo, Canada. I'm here working with the Science and Technology Policy Department for this term. So,
Welcome, Esther. And do you have a question?
oh, I do have a question actually. Concerning the last 2 slides,
Yes.
like the protection law and then like the surrogacy and how it's banned in Japan. Do you believe that these are major factors as to why there's a low birth rate in Japan currently? Because I know that's something that has been in the news for long periods of time about how there's a reduction in the working population and how there's like an upside down pyramid in the in age groups in Japan currently. It's one of the countries that has a very, like, say, less steep slope when it comes to like birth, when it comes to age groups. So my question is, like, do you believe this, like, the ban on surrogacy or like the sterilization that happened, like, it was a long period of time, like from the 40s to the 90s. Do you believe this is a huge contributing factor as to why there's a low birth rate?
So your question is the reason behind the declining birth rate.
No, I was wondering if you believe this is a contributing factor to the low birth rate currently in Japan.
I'm not so sure if this the of technology or the regulation or law have direct impact on the what is happening about the demography, but maybe, probably, I'm not sure about if it has the correlation with.
I think, I think in this case probably they don't have a correlation, but the restrictive policy on surrogacy and in vitro fertilization, well, it's actually restrictive only on surrogacy. And if we look at the comparison in Germany, where surrogacy is also banned, the population birth rate is not out of line, I think, with Europeans. I think it's more, and you can see a country like Italy, which is also very declined the birth rate. But they may be related to different reasons. But the fact that in vitro fertilization is widely used, and also in Japan there's no law on IVF. Okay, unlike many countries, they leave it, existing medical laws are considered sufficient, and so that's one of the things they've done. So again, the laws are always not always correlated, and it's only a society ban, and there are several obstetricians and gynecologists who provide surrogacy services in Japan, but they are expelled from the society for doing so. And you end up Japanese people who wanted to use surrogacy services go to other countries, the same as Germans. Okay, a lot of South Asian, and then you had an evolution of laws in Thailand, in India, and a few others to try and stop this. And it's now moved to Laos, for example. Laos is now a surrogacy capital because they haven't yet got the law organized to stop it.
Thank you.
There's also an example in Australia. The institutional ethics committees have banned surrogacy, which eventually came into law, because the main objection was it was commercialisation of children, which, I mean, any other commercial system, it's not the same. And then difficulties came, like I mentioned in my talk, where the baby was abandoned because it was born genetically damaged, sort of made this thing. And surrogacy can be done with going through the ethics committees, but it's never for payment, it has to be free. So it's the commercialisation of babies that was the biggest objection that people disagreed with.
Okay.
I think it's getting more and more common that commercial surrogacy is banned in many parts of the world.
Well, in Australia, couples go overseas to hire surrogates, and if the product doesn't please them, or just leave it and come back home. And it's usually women who go through surrogacy, they often do that because they need the money, because they're poor, and that will help their family or get them to be able to get a small business for themselves so they can better their situation. So they sell babies.
The same thing, similar thing can be said even for the organ donation. It's illegal and does business, like some people sell, for example, one kitten and just to earn money. So it's really besides special species.
Organ trading.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah?
I have a question that the Nobel Prize winner, one of the interesting thing is he used the word professional being, but you explain that would be the ethnical being. But my question is why he did not use ethnical being rather than professional being? If the meaning is a ethnical being, why do you have any idea why he not prefer to use ethical being, not ethnical, ethical being? Because you said, you explained that professional means more ethic bound meaning, so ability not to abandon the ethical being, like that?
This was the quote by one of the characters in the novel.
Oh, no.
So probably nobody knows
Nobody knows.
why one of the characters in the novel
Masculine versus
said this. Even Kazuo Ishiguro, he doesn't know. He
the
just,
character, I mean the main character in the novel, I mean for his whole life, he served as a butler. In Korean,
yes,
집사,
yes,
집사,
yes, yes.
butler for nobleman.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, and the time has passed and society has changed, but he continues to stick
Yes.
to
Yes.
the spirit of butler.
Butler,
Okay,
yes.
so that is his whole life, and I mean the novel describes that butler's mindset.
Yes.
And
Yes, yes.
in his mindset, ability not to abandon the professional being as butler, that is his definition of his dignity.
Yes.
That's what he says.
Yes,
I
yes,
think.
exactly. Thank you
Yeah,
for your
yeah.
clarification. Yes.
It's a very, very, in a sense, work-oriented. His identity is very much work-oriented.
Not
Work-oriented.
really.
He has a very strong idea about.
Of course, there is some ethics are there. Each profession has some ethics are there,
Yes.
and that is very much relate. But if the profession is killer, then ability not to abandon his killing skill,
Well, professional soldiers.
Yes, professional soldiers.
But then what about
That's
professional
like a-
professional sociologists? John Roo will always be a sociologist.
No, not really.
No?
I'm just a human being.
No?
And my identity as a sociologist would end pretty soon, within 2 years. I mean, as a professional sociology professor, my identity is going to be
So
over.
in that context, I was a question, especially when Irene one, because you are interested with the teaching the ethics in early age, right? Am I right? In the early age development.
Yeah, early age, yes.
One of the-
Starting from
Yeah,
the
yeah,
beginning.
because that is very important. You insist, and I also agree, because as far as I'm concerned, in Korea also, because of Western influence, before your the profession has to be always linked with the ethics and morality, and all of a sudden 80s, like 90s, all of a sudden they start separate. He's a professor, but he's doing many things, which is immoral things. But it's okay, because his job is job, his personal life is personal life. So I think if all the ethics in the technology, whatever, my personal point of view is they rather to teach or learn when they become a professional. I think it is very important from the early age and the school age, they have to learn the ethics, and it's much easier to adopt ethics in the profession. But if they have no background on the, like states and in Korea, they did not teach ethics in the public school. Then all of a sudden you enter into the researcher and then they talk about ethics. How can you really,
Well, that becomes like a subject to learn, and ethics is not a subject to learn. It's part of your own
Yeah,
your
lifestyle.
identity.
Yeah. That came to my mind
Yeah.
as a question.
Very interesting because, as Darrow mentioned, ethics can be taught anywhere and at the early stage, even in elementary school, ethics can be taught.
Yeah. But with the learning of empathy in the very young, there are critical periods where nature actually assists the child to learn about these issues. And this is particularly in the early years, 1 to 2 and then 3 to 4. Now a lot of kids are at home and don't even go to school until after 4 or 5 years of age. So these critical periods, it's important that they're not missed.
Well, we could even argue earlier to say that fetal alcohol syndrome is learning in the womb.
Yes,
Exactly.
Yeah, but you have fetal alcohol syndrome, and you've learned unconsciously
The fetus has learned
to be
songs
affected.
and the way
Yes.
because of the
Yeah.
mother
Yeah.
moving around. Yeah.
Are there any other questions to Tsuyoshi before we go on?
Glad to see that the PowerPoint didn't break up.
Thank you very much, Tsuyoshi.
Thank you.